A citizens' assembly brings together everyday residents to help address complex public issues in a structured, deliberate way. But the strength of a citizens' assembly doesn't start in the room. It starts with how the participants are chosen. First, over 250,000 letters went out to a cross-section of Connecticut residents inviting them to participate in our assembly. Next, independent researchers using a statistical process created multiple groups of participants called lots that balance demographics and regions to be representative of the state from those who responded to our letter. Then, through a public lottery, one lot is randomly selected to serve as the final assembly. No one, not even us, will know who is going to be on the assembly until this election. The result is a true cross-section of Connecticut. Not insiders, not advocates, not special interests. Everyday residents working together to tackle one of the state's most important challenges, property tax reform. And that credibility begins with the selection process itself.
29.
This week on the Municipal Voice, we're coming to you from Yale University for the opening day of the Connecticut Citizens Assembly.
And thank all of you. Thanks for having me here today. Again, as Kenya said, my name is Joe DeLong, Executive Director and CEO of CCM. But more importantly to you, everybody you've heard from today has been about process and governance, and Kenya as our enthusiasm officer, and has kept all of you like energized and engaged and saying like, yeah, I'm with you, I'm ready to come back. I'm the guy that will determine whether or not you run and go home before going to lunch. So, because now we start to get into the content. And by the content, what that means is these are the challenges that you're going to be asked to weigh in on and try to resolve. And you may find those challenges to be incredibly difficult. I think you will find them to be incredibly difficult. My presentation is going to give you sort of a foundation of the property tax and how it works and structure and what you need to know for your deliberations going forward. And then built off of this presentation is going to be more of the minutia throughout the process of the next couple of weekends, where you will hear from experts in each one of these individual areas that'll be able to give you even more detail. The thing you'll find about this presentation that's kind of unique though is even though it's the foundational presentation for all of this, the last slide, it's in your books. If you take that last slide and you pull it out on your final weekend, it's still going to guide everything that you do. Because what you're going to be trying to do is solve that puzzle that's created through that last slide in terms of why we have the property taxes that we have and what can be done about it. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. So, Connecticut's property tax structure and drivers. Two-part presentation. So we're going to start off though with the structure. We'll go into the drivers in a minute in that last slide I was talking about, but I'm going to give you a comparative structure of how Connecticut lays out really in comparison to, I'm going to compare it to one state, but it's almost in comparison to the rest of the country. I could do this in a really unique way, even comparing the whole state of Connecticut against county governments in other parts of the country, just an entire state against a county, but I wanted to stay a little closer to home than some of those states. So here's where we're going to start with Connecticut. 5,543 square miles. That includes our bodies of water and everything else. That's how large the state is. We have just under 3.7 million residents. Now, cool thing about that, think about this for a minute. 3.7 million residents, and you're in the 100 that were chosen to do this. We have across our small state 169 municipalities. Those are the groups in which make up the membership of my organization, led by their municipal CEOs, their town managers, their mayors, their first selectmen. We have in our small state 165 school districts. Within that 165 school districts, we do have 17 regional school districts, but you should know that those 17 regional school districts that we have only make up about 4% of Connecticut's student population. And then we have these 9 councils of governments. And I put this up here. You're going to hear from some of these Council of Government people. In fact, one of them, Laura Francis, you're either going to hear from later today or perhaps it's tomorrow. I forget which one. But the Council of Government directors will be involved throughout this process, a ton of knowledge. But to this point in time, our councils of governments are predominantly, and I'm not diminishing the work they do because they're amazing partners and they do incredible work, but they're predominantly planning organizations. They're not significant in terms of service delivery or shared services, although they are getting more and more into that space and certainly creating some opportunities there. So what does this tell you about us? Maybe not a whole lot until you start comparing us. And I pulled out the state of Maryland. It's an interesting comparison because it's not that far away. I'm not showing you a county in Texas or a county in California. By the way, there's one county in California that I could show you that Connecticut, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Delaware would all fit into to give you an idea of size. So Maryland, 12,407 square miles, more than double geographically to the state of Connecticut. 6.28 million residents. You're looking at almost double the amount of population in Maryland that we have here in Connecticut. So a lot more square footage, almost double the residents. 157 local governments. So even though they're double in size, they're about comparable, slightly less, but about comparable in terms of their municipalities. But we're going to stop there for a second because Connecticut's municipalities deliver a great deal of services. Almost all of your local services that you come to rely on every day at the very deep level, whether it's police or fire or roads or public safety issues, 911 centers, everything else delivered by our municipalities. Where in Maryland, those are delivered by 24 counties. So that is a massive amount of redundancy, comparing their county governments essentially to our municipalities because our councils of governments don't do that work. So the majority of non-educational services in Maryland are delivered across 24 counties as opposed to 169 municipalities. There is a big efficiency question that all of you will have to grapple with when it comes to that. But more importantly, look here. Double the population, more than double the geography, 165 school districts versus 24 school districts in Maryland. That sets the foundation for the structure of the property tax. Because the property tax in Connecticut is the local services side, being public ed and all the things that are delivered locally. This is the structure that we deliver it in. This is the structure that Maryland delivers it in. And by the way, this didn't have to be Maryland, as I said. I could have extrapolated this again, not even as a whole state, as a county in some states, and showing you similar numbers. So here's where we're going to go into the drivers. This slide is the slide that essentially tells you everything you need to know in the nexus of what makes up a property tax. And what do you need to reform if you want to reform the property tax? Also, let me say this. As everybody said about handing you the keys, most of you, maybe not all of you, but most of you probably came here with the thought that we need to do something about property taxes, we need to deal something with affordability, we need to create more stability. You may go through this process of these slides and say, no, you know what? This is the government that we want. This is the structure that we want. This is who we are as Connecticut. And we've made the decision that we want to continue to pay for it this way. It's okay if you do. I think it's very valuable even for us as an organization that represents communities to understand that once you understand these drivers and once you understand this system, is it truly the system that you want? Or are there areas around the margins that you want changed? Or do you think it needs overhauled completely? Those are the decisions and the conversations that you're going to have. At the center of all of it, of course, the property tax. The first component is the revenue side. Now, why is the revenue side so important is you have to understand it's not just about, a lot of times they talk about revenue, people conflate the term revenue with taxes and revenue. You hear that all, you hear them even, put together, taxes and revenue, taxes and revenue. It's not necessarily about creating more taxes. It's about how do we get to a dollar. Not how do we make the dollar $1.10 or how do we make the dollar $1.20, but how do we get to a dollar when it comes to providing local services. In Connecticut, we get to a dollar almost exclusively through property taxes. Not exclusively, we'll talk about that, but almost exclusively we get to a dollar through property taxes. That is one thing that I think that you will learn about, and you will have to make decisions. Does it make sense? Should that tax code itself just simply be more diversified? I will tell you that tax panel study experts from across the country have consistently recommended that Connecticut diversify its local tax structure. We don't for a variety of reasons. Many of them it's politically hard because what happens? If we try to diversify, you create a new local tax somewhere and the initial pullback reaction is they're raising taxes. When in reality, one could argue that the idea is not raising taxes, it's about taxing in a more balanced way. It's about consumption taxes against property taxes and income taxes and all those different things. The other thing when you look at these components, you have up the top here, we have state, local, pilot, etc. Let's start with this. Everybody think this is a beautiful room? It's a nice place, right? It's pretty cool. That's why I'm wearing 2 lavaliers instead of 1. Where'd my other one go? Oh, there it is. That's why I'm wearing 2 mics instead of 1, because the one is to present to you. The other one is because I'm having CCM capture this presentation in this room, because as Kenya said, I was born and raised in West Virginia, and I'm going to have CCM put this on a VHS tape for me, so when I go back to West Virginia and hit the family reunion, I can really convince Bubba and Billy Bob that I actually lectured at Yale. They'll never believe me, so I'm creating the proof. But in this beautiful room, did any of you walk into this room and think, there's no property taxes paid on this room? Yale has a tax exemption. Our colleges and hospitals don't pay taxes. Doesn't mean that Yale doesn't do some voluntary contributions. I want to mention that to the city of New Haven. But the upkeep of this area, of the students coming into New Haven, of the streets, of the public safety, of all of that, is going to be born in 2 ways. A, through all of the other property taxpayers in New Haven, who are going to make up the difference, because this beautiful room we're sitting in doesn't pay property taxes.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM.
Or the state in its wisdom that created this somewhat unique system in Connecticut called PILOT, which PILOT is an acronym that stands for Payment in Lieu of Taxes. And what that is that's the state essentially saying, we're taking all of these things off the tax rolls. You can't tax our colleges. You can't tax our hospitals. You can't tax our state buildings, because those are for the public good. So we're not going to allow you, New Haven, or other cities and towns to tax any of those entities, but we're going to create this pilot program where we're going to reimburse you for a portion of that. It's like 30%. We're going to reimburse you for a portion of what you would have collected had you been able to tax those entities. That's part of the revenue structure. Here's the challenge. The state historically has never held to that commitment and funded to that level that it has promised. Year in, year out, year in, year out. So when that delta happens, when the state doesn't fund that, when you can't tax Yale and the state doesn't fund it, the expense doesn't go away. It just gets shifted into all of the homeowners and everybody else in the area having to pay the difference. So that is certainly one of the mechanisms of local revenues. We have over here the property tax assessments. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it's also, you'll learn through this process from experts, how do we actually get to the property tax? We'll talk in part about things not just homes, but like the car tax. Who in here reflectively would come in and say, well, gosh, we just need to get rid of the car tax? Anybody? Show of hands. Car tax, it's such a nuisance, right? And it's considered to be predominantly unfair, because if my home sits in one town and I pick up that home and I move it to another town, based off of where it's sitting, it is valued differently. There's no question about that. You know, land and property in one area is worth more than land and property in another. But my car isn't worth any more if it's parked in the Omni parking garage than if it's parked in my driveway in Guilford or if it's parked somewhere else. So why is it taxed so differently? So why don't legislators just get rid of it? One of the reasons why they don't just get rid of it is because people like me go up there and lobby every year and tell them not to. Just being honest with you. But let me tell you why. And these are the things you're going to learn. I'm all for fixing it. And I personally, as Joe DeLong, as Kenya said, I'm Kenya, as Joe DeLong resident, it actually probably benefits me, not financially, but it benefits me if you get rid of the car tax, and here's why. It's a nuisance. So for a middle income homeowner, you know, I don't get that tax payment in the mail anymore that shows up and it catches me off guard. What I get is a higher property tax bill to make up the difference on my house. And that gets escrowed into my mortgage, and I'm really paying the same thing, but I'm not feeling it the same way. You know, the experience is I pay my mortgage, that tax kind of goes away. My escrow payment goes up a little bit every year anyway because the property taxes go up. So I don't really feel it, where when I get that bill in the mail, I feel that. And as a middle class, a person in that area, that's very real. But everything has a trade-off. Here's why people like me lobby against it. The big beneficiaries, the people who get the big tax break, who really make out, are the people with the big fleets. Amazon, FedEx, those types of places get a massive benefit by getting rid of that tax. But who gets hurt? The people who get hurt are those who are low-income people who don't have cars that use public transit. It's single moms with their kids living in urban communities that their rent goes up. Or it's a senior citizen who's now retired, who's trying to live in their childhood home and stay there, that doesn't even drive anymore, that doesn't even own a car anymore. But now by eliminating the car tax and creating that tax shift, the property tax on their home goes up to a point where they can't afford it. They don't get any benefit of it going away on the car, but what they do get is they get the tax shift, and they get the pain put upon them in a way that they may not be able to absorb. So these are some of the types of things that you'll have to consider as you go through this. Who are the winners and who are the losers? Because I will suggest to you everything I'm going to show you, every decision that you're going to make, you are not going to make a single decision in this room, I don't believe, that'll be all winners. Every decision will have a trade-off. That's why this issue has been so tough for so long. The next part of this, the non-education services, the things that we talked about that we deliver across the 169 cities and towns, where other people like Maryland deliver it across 24 counties. Why is it so hard for us to create more of a shared services structure? Why can't we get under just the councils of governments and say, hey, a lot of these things, let's do them collectively together to find more efficiencies? One big part of that is we're a collective bargaining state. So cities and towns, they can't just get together and say, let's combine this service. When they go to combine the service, that service has to be collectively bargained because we're a collective bargaining state. And in many cases, it's more than one collective bargaining unit. If you try to combine things into one service, you might have 4 or 5 different collective bargaining units that are involved. And now you don't always have a labor management dispute. Sometimes you now have a labor dispute where 5 bargaining units who are all bargaining for the same thing are bargaining from 5 different positions, making it ultimately in the end sometimes completely impossible to overcome. So those are the things that we deal with. I will tell you, that is why in Connecticut that you can get off of I-95 and pull over and dial 911 and an operator answers and you start telling them what your emergency is and they say, oh, hold on, where you came off the cell tower, you're not on a state road anymore, that's the town. Let me connect you to 911 for that town. And then they connect you to 911 for that town and you start telling them what your emergency is and you give them exactly where they are and they say, oh, that road does go through our town, but you're right on the other side of the border, so I got to connect you to 911 to the other town. By the time you get to the 911 center to help you and they answer and say, 911, what's your emergency? You're like, hell, I don't know anymore. I can't even remember what my emergency is. You know, that is in large part because of trying to overcome those types of issues and the people involved, because there's a trade-off. Somebody has to give something up. A police station that doesn't like to be dark at night is now dark because you've combined your 911 centers, all of those types of things. So those non-education services are incredibly restricted, not only by our desire for local control, which plays a part in it, but also by our structure and our laws. Our collective bargaining statutes and the way that they're set up sometimes make it very restrictive. Let me give you one more example. I want to check my time because I want to make sure that I'm good there. Yes, we're okay. So we had a community one time that had a main water line break, and it was cut off, it was a public safety issue, and cut off water to people's homes. It was a fairly significant repair. It was a small community, and the small community did not have the capacity within their workforce to deal with it. Not uncommon. So they had to third-party contract outside. The third-party contractors weren't available to get there until later the following day. And it was, something that really needed to be resolved now. So that first selectman picked up the phone and called the suburb that was next to them, who had a very large PSC department, and said, I'm in a mess here. Like, I can't get help until the next day. I have this water line break. Here's what's going on. We have to get service restored. And the mayor said, no problem. Like, I have a crew. They're not super busy right now. They can come over. They're experts in this. They're really good. I'll send them right over there and they'll fix it. And then the mayor got a call back from the foreman who said, you can't assign our people to work across the town line. Our collective bargaining contract says that we can't be assigned work across the town line. We're not going over there. And that mayor had to call that first selectman back, and at a considerably higher expense, it got fixed over 24 hours later by an outside contractor where people went through a long period of time without having water. So, these are things that, and I'm not, believe me, I am not busting on collective bargaining. And I'm certainly not busting on organized labor. If you look at my history, I came from a state where I was usually supported when I was an office holder by organized labor. I came from a labor family. I understand, to me, I look at organized labor like I look at all of you. People who need a voice who otherwise may not have one. And I think that's important. I think it's important for labor. I think it's important that people who otherwise may not have a voice, who are impacted by things, have that voice. But for you, as you do this work, you have to understand that some of these things that might make sense on the surface, if we don't do something or figure out a way to work better through those collective bargaining laws, that they can become a real hindrance to creating those types of efficiencies. Now, here's the biggie. K through 12 education, the delivery side and the funding side. I showed you on the original slide, right, the 165 school districts versus very few in other states. But I want you to think about those districts for a minute and those costs. Every one of those, a board of education, a superintendent, maybe an assistant superintendent, a central office, an administrative staff, maybe a maintenance director, maybe a curriculum director, all of those things, those all come at a very significant cost. And all of us, myself included, have kids. I want to support education. I want to support my kids. I want them to have the best education possible. But I also want my tax dollars to actually make it into the classroom in an efficient way, not to fund layer after layer after layer of bureaucracy. That's my opinion. I'm trying to give you facts, but I put my opinions in every once in a while here. But my opinion as a parent is, I don't mind paying taxes for my kids' education. I know some people who don't have kids in the system, they get tired of it. I get it. I get people's different viewpoints. I don't mind funding it. But I want to know that the money is going to efficiently support them, not create extra layers of bureaucracies. Then you get over here, the funding side. It's so very, very important that people understand this. The great frustration of my job, the greatest frustration, is that when local budgets come up for referendums and they get voted down and they get voted down and they get voted down and the people are upset and they think the tax increase is ridiculous and it's vote no, vote no, vote no. And then if they're really angry, they go after, the mayor or the first selectman or the town manager or the council or the board of finance because they know it as the local tax. But yet, they never once try to hold their state elected office holders accountable for it. Never once when a local budget gets voted down do the people storm to the home or to the office of their state legislator. They go to the mayor. Most of your property taxes, folks, are set by state policy. Almost all of it is. And we'll show that on the next slide here too. But I want to talk about this funding formula. The last time the education cost-sharing funding formula, the formula itself was modified, was in 2013, okay, at the state level. That's the proportion that the state pays. Whatever they don't pay, the property tax makes up the rest. If that 2013 formula, I hope you find this number as staggering as what I do. If that 2013 formula never changed, which it never has, but simply had a piece in it that said that it had to be adjusted for inflation each year to just keep pace, to just make sure that proportionally the state was still paying its proportional share. That formula would reflect $900 million more today to towns and cities through their schools than what it does. It's almost $900 million that formula has lagged because of it not adjusting for inflation. So where does that $900 million go? It goes right into the property tax. It goes straight to it. So now the conservative people amongst us will rightfully say, we can't, $900 million, that's crazy. We can't afford that. We need to be more efficient. A lot of that efficiency goes back to the delivery side. But let me tell you this. Well, the ECS funding formula was never adjusted to keep pace with inflation. During that same period of time, the state revenues significantly outpaced inflation. So the state took in more than enough money because it outpaced inflation to keep up with this proportional share of public ed spending. They just chose not to. They chose not to because, again, the torches and the pitchforks go to town hall, it doesn't go to them. So understanding the role that this plays, and then also get people to say, well, we have declining enrollments. So I have to take into account declining enrollments. Well, I'll tell you two things. The first thing is the formula is per student. So the formula already takes into account declining enrollments. The second thing is enrollment is a variable cost. So if I have 2 fifth grade classrooms of 24 students and I lose 4 fifth graders, I lose the funding for those 4 students, but I can't combine 22 and 22 into one classroom of 44 and get rid of a teacher. I can't have a classroom that big. So I still have the teachers. I still have the rising health care. I still have the facilities. I still have all the fixed costs and the increases of those fixed costs. But I don't have the ability to collect the money now for a kid that doesn't exist, even though the fixed costs haven't changed. And I don't have a delivery system that can combine me with 4 or 5 other communities to where I could actually realize some efficiencies. So this is so important, folks, because this is about 70% of your property taxes in most of your communities is right there. The last component I want to talk about, mandates. Now on the education side, you'll see a lot of this stuff crosses over. There's education mandates that impact it. But there's a group called ACIR, which is another acronym, the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. It's created and sanctioned by the state. The last report that ACIR did on mandates said that there were over 1,400 mandates that the state legislature and the executive had placed on towns and cities, over 1,400. Let me say this, not all mandates are bad. We're probably pretty blessed that we have certain mandates. The question you're going to have to ask yourself is process-wise. Where should the process be? Because you don't have time to go through 1,400 mandates. But how should the process work to add a new one? Should there be more highlighted of what it does? Because most of these mandates, when they're passed, don't have a big old, red flag on them that says this is going to raise property taxes. So you have to look at the process, but you also need to understand them a little bit. I want to share with you a mandates example. I'm going to check my time, make sure I'm okay. Yeah, a couple minutes. So, great mandates example. Give you an idea of what some of these smaller, we'll call them nuisance mandates, but at 1,400, people compare it to a death by 1,000 cuts. The one little cut doesn't kill you, but when you get so many of them, it's so difficult. We have a mandate on the books that was created because years ago, really sad story. Years ago, a lady who was a renter was in an accident and she fell into a coma. And years later, after she came out of her coma, because she had been in a coma for years, her property that had been in her apartment was disposed of. And so now she comes out of a coma and everything she had in her life before was gone. Furniture was gone, bed was, all that stuff was gone. And people thought that was really terrible, which it is. So in the legislature's wisdom, they said, well, we're never going to have that issue again in Connecticut. So they passed a mandate that now every single time that a tenant is evicted from their apartment, it's the city or town's responsibility to store their belongings. The state actually mandates that cities and towns get involved in landlord-tenant disputes. Probably the only state in the country that does that. The cost associated with that is you send workers there to gather the things, then you take those things somewhere and you store them. After you pay to store them for so long, very few of them are ever picked up again. Then you pay those same workers to go back and remove them and dispose them. Most of the time, the workers are so overworked that they never even get back there to remove them or dispose them. We just keep paying the rent on the facilities to store the things. And all of you in this room that pay property taxes, you're paying for this. You are paying for every time somebody gets evicted from their apartment. Maybe not evicted because maybe they just left. They just packed up one day and left some of their stuff behind that they didn't want anymore, and they jumped in a car and they drove to Boston, or they went to Pittsburgh, or they went somewhere like that, and immediately it's in your wallet to go and to pay a municipal official to go and gather their stuff and to take their stuff to a storage facility and to pay to store it, and then to dispose of it later after a certain time period has passed. Once again, how often that disposal even takes place because of the time that people have available. These are the types of things that are mandated, not funded. The state wants towns and cities to do it. Don't give them the funding to do it, require them to do it. The most recent one that all of you would probably recognize, and most of you probably support, maybe some of you don't, early voting. Like we even passed, early voting is a great thing for most people. Most people, I'm not speaking for you, but most people, and that's why I think it passed on the ballot, most people love the idea of early voting. It's convenient. But nobody talks about the fact that the state doesn't fully fund early voting. So all of the costs that are associated with early voting are in the property tax. The property tax, a state policy, was created to allow early voting, but the state doesn't fund it, you fund it through property taxes. So those are some of the other type mandates. And then on this side of things, the labor mandates. Every session, without fail, we get a new mandate on towns and cities that is something, and again, I'm not saying that all of these things, there are groups that want them, but there is something for typically organized labor. Most of those are in our workers' compensation system. It's some benefit, it's some coverage, it's something that the General Assembly says, hey, this group came to us, they wanted this, they articulated a reason why it made sense. We're going to take it out of collective bargaining because they couldn't get it in collective bargaining. We're going to mandate that towns and cities have to provide coverage for it, typically through the workers' compensation system, and it's sort of hidden there so nobody really knows or pays any attention to it. Well, the workers' compensation rates continue to rise and rise and rise, and the exposure continues to rise and rise and rise. And what pays those rates or pays for that exposure? property tax. Not funded by the state to cover those rates or that exposure, mandated that the towns allow it, require it, provide it. You figure out how to pay for it. And by the way, the only tool we're going to give you to pay for it is to raise property taxes. So this map, if you will, you're going to hear a lot of expert presentations throughout the process, maybe more, maybe less on your self-governance model, depending upon what you want and adjustments that you make over these next couple of weeks. But at the end, if you can solve any one of these areas, it's going to impact this, because that's what drives the property taxes. The structure, which creates this, which were the first slides, the structure of how we deliver services, and these drivers that drive the actual taxation. I can almost promise every one of you that when you come back here in September or whatever, if you pull this slide back up, you'll say, yep, every bit of work that we did throughout this process fit into one of these categories that ultimately led to why we have the third highest property taxes in the country. So.
The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state and local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders.